let's go ahead and talk about Nordstream. So obviously, that was also the major news that happened last week. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. In the middle of the speech that Jake Sullivan was giving there about NATO membership and more, he also touched on specifically U.S. allegations around the Nord Stream pipeline. Let's take a listen.
Thanks, Jake. In his speech this morning, the president called the Nord Stream pipeline attacks quote, a deliberate act of sabotage. And he said, now the Russians are pumping out misinformation and lies about it. Should we take that to mean that the U.S. now believes that Russia was likely responsible for this act of sabotage?
Well, first, Russia has done what it frequently does when it is responsible for something, which is make accusations that it was really someone else who did it. We've seen this repeatedly over time. But the president was also clear today that there is more work to do on the investigation before the United States government is prepared to make an attribution in this case. One of the practical reasons for that is that because gas is emanating from these pipelines, the Danish authorities and other authorities in the Baltic Sea can't actually get down to the source of the leak to do forensics on what appears to be an explosion. So we will have to wait until a combination of physical inspection, intelligence gathering, and consultation with our allies to make a definitive determination. But what we can say unequivocally is the suggestions Russia has made about the United States and other countries are flat out false.
So Jake Sullivan, they're saying a couple of things. Number one, we're not responsible for this. For number two, no NATO ally is responsible for this. And then, of course, he basically de facto blames the Russians, saying it's on Russia,
it's kind
but
of
we don't have the
process
actual
of elimination
evidence
here.
Right. I mean, according to him. And then Biden also alluding to that whenever he was speaking about Nord Stream in the middle of a hurricane. Let's talk about that.
I thank you all very much. You also asked me earlier about the pipeline. And let me say this. It was a deliberate act of sabotage, and now the Russians are pumping out disinformation and lies. We're going to work with our allies to get to the bottom of precisely what happened. And at my direction, I've already begun to help our allies enhance the protection of this critical infrastructure. And at the appropriate moment when things calm down, we're going to be sending divers down to find out exactly what happened. We don't know that yet, exactly.
So two denials there, both at the presidential level and by the national security advisor. No surprise, Putin, unprompted actually, brought this up during his annexation speech. Let's put that up there on the screen. He says it was the West that blew up the pipeline as Europe steps up its vigilance. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the U.S. and its allies blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, and saying that he was, quote, raising the temperature about Europe and its energy security. He says, quote, the sanctions were not enough for the Anglo-Saxons. They moved on to sabotage. It is hard to believe, but it is a fact that they organized the blasts on the Nord Stream international gas pipeline. So you've got fingers getting pointed at everybody. Look, we have no idea. Obviously, there would probably, frankly, we'll probably never know, given the accusations, and nobody will ever accept each other's evidence.
I mean, if the U.S. intelligence comes out and was like, it was Russia,
right,
we're not really going to be too confident.
And who knows?
About that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, who knows? I will say the oddest part of this whole thing, I cannot get over it. Let's put this up there on the screen, is Radek Sikorski. I pointed him out in my monologue on this, that member of the EU Parliament, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs for the European Union, and the wife of Anne Applebaum, one of the biggest warmongers here in the U.S. press. He originally thanked the United States for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, but then he went ahead and deleted that tweet. So, look, extremely odd. He left it up for a couple of days, then took it down. Who knows what exactly he was alluding to? I know there's there's probably a lot of currency right now and be like, oh, absolutely was America. I mean, really all they can point to is that, and then they point to that one comment by Joe Biden in a press conference when he's like, we're going to end the Nord Stream pipeline. He's like, well, what about, he's like, don't worry, like, we're going to end it. Listen, I mean, you've got that. Then you also have the Russians who
are doing all kinds of stuff right now.
They're the ones who invaded Ukraine, okay? So like they're capable of doing crazy stuff. Also, that pipeline wasn't even flowing. There was no gas in it. Like it would have been shut down since August. The Russians didn't really have a lot to lose from doing that. And I mean, it just makes it, look, I could see both sides of it. On the Russian side, it makes a hell of a lot of sense in order to do something really crazy to warn the Europeans, like, hey, we got you. That pipeline run into Norway, we could blow that up tomorrow.
Right.
And you'd be in a serious trouble.
The case that the Russians did it is basically like, okay, the European population hasn't turned against this war in the way that they hoped.
Right.
this would be a way to send a message of like, y'all are going to be in some really bad shape this winter, and to freak the population out, to like sort of send a warning that we can target this sort of infrastructure and make things even that much worse for you. And then on the domestic political front from Russia, obviously he's blaming the West, so it strengthens his argument of like the West is out to get us and they're doing all this crazy stuff to try to bolster his case for this war that he is making domestically. So that's sort of like, you know, if you are inclined to believe that Russia did it, that would be the case. And I think if that was the case, you also would have kind of an interest from the US and the West in not directly saying that it was Russia. Because then if you don't convince your own populations that this was Russia, he doesn't get the benefit of this like message sending and freaking everybody out about them targeting the infrastructure. I mean, the argument against this is like, you know, it seems like insane for them to blow up their own infrastructure, like their own.
But they weren't
pipeline,
using it, right?
They're very
so
invested
that's why I
in.
get it. Yeah, look, I see both sides. I have no idea. As we said, in terms of the quote-unquote evidence, let's put this up there. Denmark and Sweden submitted a joint report to the to the United Nations. They say that there were hundreds of pounds of TNT which were used to damage the Nord Stream pipeline. They have some Richter evidence in terms of the explosion, the magnitudes that they were used, that they have in sort of undersea detection, and intel sources say that they believe 500 kilograms of TNT were used in 4 separate places, containing the same force as a heavy aircraft bomb. So that's what they claim. Look, we genuinely have no idea. The head of Gazprom, you know, the Russian state energy giant, they say, you know, this is absolutely ridiculous. Like, we would never do this. Maybe they didn't even know about it if it was done. That's what, you know, we can't rule out anything. So I think that's just where we have to put it. Personally, I think we'll never know. And I think that no side will ever submit evidence that either will conclusively draw. I think whatever happened, the consequences of it remain clear to me, which is that at the end of the day, these were explosions that were 12 nautical miles away from a NATO ally's shores. That's crazy. It has a proven ability to hurt European energy infrastructure right as we're heading into winter, a very critical time. And the consequences of it is that you should combine it with all of the news that we have talked about. The advances on the Ukrainian front, the nuclear threats, the referenda, the ongoing massive political strife, domestic strife at home for Putin. And at the end of the day, the results of it probably matter more than actually what happened, because we're just never going to know the results of it.
I would not trust any media figure who is telling you that they feel certain that it was one group or another group, because truly there is not enough evidence to say.
Absolutely.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.